Welcome to
Blog Talk
Solutions
Radio.
with Courtney Anderson. Today we have a show that is all about our Law Lovers Lounge series. And of course, in our Law Lovers Lounge series, what we are focusing on is law, loving it, and talking, sharing, learning about the law. Understanding, of course, with the disclaimer that I absolutely am a lawyer and attorney in the United States. I am not your lawyer by virtue of you taking part in this program. This is just a discussion, and that's an important legal disclaimer. So we have our Law Lovers Lounge series, and today our show title is A Marriage License is Just a Piece of Paper. Or is it? So we're talking about this issue of marriage and the idea of a marriage license. And so I actually was practicing law yesterday. I was at a courthouse in the United States in the state of Nevada, which is one of the locations where I live, and I'm able there to take part in many different types of legal issues through volunteer legal services, so through services that are given to people by attorneys, licensed attorneys, to people who just are in the public or people who may have income limitations or other issues, so they're provided low cost or free cost services. So I was yesterday practicing law, and this topic came up. I was actually talking to people about their legal issues about family law, and family law is everything that basically deals with your family, right? So marriage, children, custody, all that good stuff. And the really interesting thing was this whole discussion about marriage. There are so many questions that people have that I've dealt with over the years in regards to what the consequences are of marriage. And so let's, in this Law Lovers Lounge, take a little bit of time to talk about marriage. Now, again, the rules are different depending on what specific place on the planet you're located. So I'm going to just sort of broadly talk about some broad laws, but that's from a United States-based perspective. Again, depending on where you're located, literally the city that you live in, the county or parish that you live in, the state that you live in, if you're in the United States, what nation you live in, again, what local jurisdiction you live in. There's so many rules because each area will have their own rules, right? So a city will have their own municipality rules at times, or a county or a region or a parish will have their own rules, and then a state or some other type size jurisdiction will have their rules, and then nations will have their rules. I mean, there's just, layers of these, which is what makes it so exciting for those of us who love law. So I can't specifically address marriage where you live because I don't know where you live, A, and B, the rules where you live are going to be specifically different from the rules where other people live. But in general, there's something that I'm going to refer to sort of as a legal marriage. And the whole idea there is that when we think about marriage, we think about a couple of things. I think some of us immediately think about love. Oh, marriage is love. Some people hear the word marriage and think, oh, money. Some people think, oh, money, marriage, if I get married, it'll cost money. If I get married and then I get divorced, I'll have to pay money. Some people marry for money. But the bottom line is that this is a government legal process. I'm not at all addressing religious or spiritual or any other type of marriage that's not based on the legal aspect of it. And the ideas behind marriage are amazing, right? So we're humans. We have our different societies. You look back throughout human history. Of course, we have our emotions and our passions, and we form pair bonds. We fall in love. We fall out of love. People have children. As societies and nation states became more formal, when you have societies that have rules, laws we'll call them, typically what they're trying to do is either encourage certain behavior or discourage certain behavior. So, there are many historical reasons behind marriage in many parts of the world. Marriage is not solely something that an individual thinks about based on how they feel about someone or what their heart desires. Historically, marriage encompasses not just the person, but their whole, family or tribe or group, because marriages are alliances. And so, certainly when we look back and we can read whether it's royalty or all different types of interesting narratives about the strategy behind a marriage, right? So, someone from this family goes out and marries, makes an alliance with someone from this other family, and now they're more powerful, and, all this intrigue happens, and it's exciting. The idea is that it's not just about love. Sometimes it is, which is awesome. In more modern times, certainly in many societies, there's more of a movement toward this sort of individualized aspect of love, that I'm making a marriage that is based on my individual feelings. And we still have lots of parts of the world and lots of communities all over the world where people still have arranged marriages. And the idea in some aspect is marriage is something that impacts entire communities, right? So the individual can't just be left on their own to just randomly make choices, based maybe on their emotions or their hormones or whatever. That you have to think about the things. What are you trying to accomplish? What's right for your family? What's right for your group, whether it's a tribe or religious, an ethnic group, your class status. And so we still have all over the world arranged marriages. And we have these sort of idea of individual marriages. My aspect, again, is the legal part. And the legal part actually is going to apply whether it's arranged or it's individual. But the idea is that the government is invested in this. The government has something to say. And that they want to know who you're married to, they want to know when you married them, and then a whole bunch of laws are going to kick in, are going to become effective based on this marriage. So, I'm at the courthouse, and I've done this, I've been a lawyer for about 17 years. It's amazing how the time flies, especially since I was still, a baby when 17 years ago, right? So, there's been so much misunderstanding about what marriage is. Again, I'm not talking about the marriage of your mind, your emotion, your spirit, your body with some other person. I'm talking about legally what the government looks at. So here's what happened. So recently, I'm talking to somebody, trying to give them some legal advice and services, and they start talking, and they tell a story. And so they said something like, oh, okay, well, so it was my mom, right? And so she was married to my dad, and then they divorced like 15 years ago. And then she married this other guy. It must have been about like 10 years ago. Anyway, so he left, and nobody's seen him in like 5 years. I don't know where he is. And then my mom said she didn't divorce him because she couldn't find him. But then she married this other guy like 2 months ago. Okay. I stopped the person right there, and I said, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. I said, your mom legally was married, to the best of your knowledge, to your dad, then legally divorced, to the best of your knowledge, and then legally married another person. And then that person disappeared. No one's seen them in several years. And then just very recently, your mom went and had another marriage to another person while she's still legally married to the person before that. And the young lady said, well, yeah. Okay, time out, big problem. Okay. It's really important to understand the legal power, and I do mean power, of marriage. Legally, marriage brings so many rights, responsibilities, obligations, and again, power. Once you're the legal spouse, depending on where you live in the world, you have the ability to potentially be liable for your spouse's debt. So years ago, I was practicing law, and I had a case. My client was getting divorced. My client had married a gentleman much younger than her, I think about 20 years younger than she was. She was pretty financially well off. She had a lot of property and investments and income. Her young husband didn't have any resources, which is fine. Many times people have different issues with resources, but they have other complementary parts of their relationship, and it's healthy and wonderful and things of that nature. This wasn't one of those cases. So my client goes to decide she's coming to me, she's going to get a divorce. And so she pulls her credit report, and she starts to look on there, which she hadn't done in a very long time, and starts to see that there's a whole bunch of credit card charges. Credit cards she didn't even know existed, right? So she looks at her credit card and says, what's this Visa? What's this MasterCard? What are these charges? I don't even know what this is. Well, it turns out she's married. Her husband had a Social Security number, of course, is her legal spouse. They live in a state in some parts of the world. In the United States, there's a few states, there are literally just a few of them, that are called community property states. And the idea there is that once you legally marry someone, and I'm doing other separate programs just on this in depth, but I'll just mention it. Once you legally marry someone in a community property state, the idea is that then there's this thing called a community, which is awesome, right? That's created at the marriage. It's a brand new legal entity. And anything that either party bring into the community are equally shared, right? So once we get married in a community property state, I went out and worked at my job, and I earned $1,000. And my spouse went out and worked at their job and earned $10. So both the $1,000 and the $10 equally go into the community. And there's a presumption that we're going to equally share in the community. So even though I put in $1,000 and he put in $10, the presumption is that we'll be 50-50 partners in this, and that he'll have equal rights to the community property as I do. Do you see? So that he would get 50% and I would get 50%, even though some would argue and say, well, how's that fair? He didn't put in 50%. He only put in, $10. You put in $1,000. It doesn't matter. We created this new beautiful thing together when we got married, and we have this awesome opportunity to be part of our new community, and we are going to equally share. It also means, though, that you can be equally responsible for community debt. So what was happening in this case, this was a community property state, is the wife was realizing that even though she was not aware that the community, her husband, had gone and gotten new debt, and she's liable for it now. And that was stressful and upsetting for her, because many of the things he was charging, in addition to the fact she didn't know about them, were also going to his new girlfriend, which, hey. Legally, when you marry someone, there is a long list of responsibilities and benefits and privileges, everything from property to assets to income to retirement benefits to inheritance law to the right to, make decisions for the other person. I mean, this is a contract. Like, this is a big deal. This is one of the biggest decisions that you can make in your life, because you are entering into a relationship that really, honestly, other than maybe a parent-child relationship or something legally analogous, a guardianship, there's no other relationship you're going to go into in your life where the other person is going to have this kind of power, but also a type of responsibility, which makes sense if you think about historically the idea. And I'm looking at this from a positive perspective. So there's a whole narrative of analyzing marriage from a historical perspective that, that argues that it was, set up to reinforce property rights, for certain gender groups, that it exploits other gender groups, and that it's, was set up to sort of reinforce power structures that weren't necessarily equitable. I'm not talking or entering into any of that discussion at this exact moment. What I am talking is just the idea that is marriage, and is a marriage license from the government, wherever you are located, a piece of paper? My argument is, of course, it's literally a piece of paper, at least historically it was. You would go to the government wherever you are, you would fill out whatever paperwork, pay whatever fee. The government then gives you a piece of paper that says you're married. Here you go. Yes, it's literally a piece of paper, or at least it was historically. Of course, now electronically you have so many things, but yes, it was documentation that this was your marriage. It doesn't represent, though, just that it's paper. Its power isn't in the piece that it's paper. Its power is in that it's documenting this incredibly amazing, complicated, sophisticated legal arrangement that you've entered into with somebody. That is what it's documenting. So the confusion I think that people continue to have, that I've heard questions about, for literally the last 17 years as a lawyer, people just don't get a couple of things. Marriage, again, is incredibly powerful. Do not legally marry someone unless you sit down and go through all of the rules and consequences that are going to kick in if you choose to do this. What am I saying? Where do you live in the world? I want you to go on to the internet, and I want you to put in wherever that place is, and then marriage law or marriage requirement, marriage, and just start reading what it means to marry somebody under the eyes of the law, about debt, about income, about property, who gets your stuff, okay? This is really important. If you fail to do this and you jump up and you just go marry people without understanding what the rules and the consequences are, that's your choice. But here's the deal. You're still going to be held responsible for the rules. And in most parts of the world, it's really, because it's so important that, because all these rules apply and rights and obligations, it's important that the government knows who you're marrying, and they have some rules that they're going to use depending on where you are in the world. So depending on where you are in the world, there are going to be some kind of rules about age, of when someone's old enough to marry. Now, again, depends on where you are in the world. It's usually somewhere from the teenage years, some earlier teens, up to later teens. So usually what they're going to call it age of consent. That's how old I need to be legally to be able to go ahead and enter into one of these legal marriages. On my own, or in some parts of the world, you can't do a marriage on your own at a certain age, but maybe they'll have a rule that says that if your parents go ahead and agree to it, then you can get married. Okay, so some places it'll say something like at 14 years old, you yourself can't go out legally and get married. You're not old enough that if your parents agree, you can. In some parts of the world, but once you become the age of consent, then you yourself are old enough, at whatever age that is, depending on where you lived, then you can enter into your marriage. When you enter into your marriage, then you're obligated. You also have to understand the only way to get out of the marriage is through some sort of legal end. So legally you enter it, legally you got to get out of it. What am I saying? There's so many people that I, over the years, would work with, and they would say something like, oh, we're just common law married. I'm going to do a whole another show and program on this issue. Common law marriage is the idea that you don't have to go down to the government and get married and fill out paperwork and pay a fee or whatever and go to some government office, right, to get the marriage license piece of paper. Common law marriage in the U.S., and again, there's a few states in the U.S. that have this. I originally practiced law in one of those states. The idea of common law marriage is I don't go to the government office, fill out the paperwork, pay a fine. No. I just have a marriage that I set up on my own. So I never went to the government. In general, the rule in the location I used to practice full-time law, the rule was that the couple agreed amongst themselves to be married. They held themselves out as married, and they cohabitated. So that means that agreeing amongst yourself is what it seems like. If I sat down with some other person who's of the age of consent, remember, they have to be old enough. That's part one. And we say to each other, do you agree to be married? Yeah, I agree to be married to you. I agree to be married to you too. Oh, we're married. That's part one. We agreed. Part two, we hold ourselves out. That means that other people present ourselves, we hold ourselves out as husband and wife. So if I'm talking to my neighbor, I'll say, yeah, that's my husband over there. My husband is talking to somebody at work, oh, that's my wife. We're holding ourselves out. We're referring to each other as husband or wife or my spouse. That's what we're doing, right? The other thing is that we cohabitate. We live together. In some jurisdictions, there are rules on how long you have to live together. In some jurisdictions, there are none. So it could be that we met on, Monday of a week, and we decided, that Monday afternoon that we're the ones, and we're moving forward in a life of love in marriage. And we talk to each other, and I say, oh, do you agree to be married to me? And then he says, I agree to be married to you. And then we go out and tell people later on Monday, evening, we're at a restaurant, and we're saying to the waitress, that's my wife, that's my husband. And then that night we move in together Monday night. Then we meet all three. Now we just met, but it can happen quickly. The deal is, if you get into one of these things, right, you just set it amongst yourselves, you held each other out to other people, and then you cohabitated for some period of time, you live together, then you're in a legal marriage if you're in a place that recognizes this common law marriage. That means you have to get out of it with a legal divorce because it's legally binding. It seems like, and this was something that came up over and over and over again. People would say, well, I don't understand why I have to go get divorced and fill out paperwork. Like when we got married, we didn't. I hear you. But when you just picked a different alternate way to have a legal marriage. And the legal marriage is recognized with all the same rules, right, about debt, about income, about stuff, about inheritance, about property rights, about the ability to decide medical treatment, about all kinds of stuff, right? So you got in it, and it's legally valid, so you got to get out of it in a legally valid way, and there's no such thing in most, at least in the parts of the U.S. that I am licensed, that you just sort of talk your way back out of it, right? Like you say to yourselves, I agree that I'm divorcing you. I agree too. We hold ourselves out. We're divorced and then we stop living together. It doesn't work backwards like that. You have to go have the legal paperwork. So the marriage situation is a person old enough, is a person related to you too closely. Now, again, the rules are different. The jurisdiction that I started practicing law in a long time ago, you could marry anybody who was your first cousin or further apart in relation. So I can marry my mom's brother's child, right? My first cousin, but I can't marry my brother, and I can't marry my mom's brother. So I'm not supposed to be marrying any closer than my first cousin. So that was the United States state of Texas. I can marry my first cousin, and then of course I can move out from there. My first cousin, second cousin, third cousin, whatever. I'm good. But I just can't move closer in. I'm not supposed to be marrying my own sibling, whether it's my full sibling, we have the same parents, or we have partial parents. We have the same mom, or we have the same dad. They're too close. I've got to be first cousin or out, further out. Then I can't move closer in. I'm not supposed to marry my own parent. These things, believe it or not, all have come up in our questions. That's just one example. So wherever you live, look up what the rule is. So the person has to be at age of consent, with or without parental approval. You have to check on that. If they're too young, even with parental approval, then you can't do it. Then there will be a certain age that with parental approval you can do it. There's a certain age that they can just go on their own and do whatever they want to do without their parents. Are they too closely related to you? So check. I just told you that in the United States, Texas, where I started practicing, a while ago, you can marry your first cousin. Some parts of the world you can't. It's too close. You got to check and see what the rules are. Okay, so are they age of consent? Are they too closely related to you? Here's a big thing. In some parts of the world, the law will allow you legally to have multiple spouses at a time, and they'll have rules about it. How many spouses can you have at a time? What are the rules? In many parts of the world, it applies to certain genders that are allowed to do that. Some parts of the world, women can do it. Some parts of the world, men. Some parts of the world, no one can do this. You don't have multiple spouses, right? And polygamy, the idea is that you're going to have one legal spouse at a time in many parts of the world. That means that the issue I brought up a little while ago where the person said, hey, my mom was already married to this one guy, and then recently she went out and had another marriage. No. I mean, you can go out as much as you want to and fill out paperwork at government offices and give them money for marriage licenses, but if you're already legally married to somebody else, it's void. So all of these things I'm talking about mean that even though I understand that physically you can take yourself down to the government office, fill out the paperwork, and get a marriage license, right? Because they're not necessarily going to be able to verify everything the way they should. Too young, they're under the age of consent wherever you live. If the person is too close to you as a relative, like we just talked about, are they, whatever the rule is, are they your first cousin? Is that okay where you live legally, or is that not okay in terms of the people you're allowed to marry? Or Are you legally married to somebody else? If you're legally married to somebody else, even if nobody knows that when you fill the paperwork out and you think, oh, I got my license, it's not valid. Because when it comes up later to get divorced, and if there's anybody who checks to see if you're legally married to this person and they find that you're already legally married to somebody else, and this happens actually a lot. This is extremely common. I don't get it. What I mean by saying I don't get it is, I guess I do get it. You know, people think, oh, it's a hassle to get divorced, right? Especially if you're mad at somebody or they've left or you've left or you don't want to ever see them again. And I guess people sort of feel like, you know, what's done is done. I'm just going to move forward with my life, and they just sort of go out, find some other new person, you know, fall in love or whatever, and go out and have another marriage, you know, certificate, knowing full well, though, that they still have this other marriage. And I think, you know, obviously it's illegal. The second attempted marriage is illegal. And I've known people in my own life, you know, family, friends who've had this happen. And the person who didn't know, who thought they were having a legal marriage while the other person did know they were married to somebody else, it's just cruel. It's heartbreaking, right? Wow. Deception. So it's void. It's void. I understand you have a piece of paper. The paper's worthless because you weren't qualified when you did it. You tricked and lied. It's fraud. It's void. The marriage is not real. You have no marriage. You never were married. So when you look at this idea, the person has to be old enough. The person has to be related to you, whatever the law requires, certain amount of separation in your jurisdiction. The person has to not be married to someone else or not be married to more people than they're legally allowed to at that time, depending on where you live and what the rules are. If the person qualifies for all this and you go ahead, I don't care that you'd only known them 2 days. I don't care that now, you know, you thought they were somebody else and you married them and found out they're horrible. You did it. So now to get out of it, then you're going to have to move forward with the divorce. And we do programs. We have lots of programs on that. But you started the marriage. You got to end it legally. You legally are married. I don't care. You ran away to Vegas. I hope you do come to Vegas because I live here and have property here in other parts of the U.S. It's a wonderful town. But you understand, you don't take these things lightly. And it doesn't matter, you know, what you thought the person was or what you thought the arrangement was or any of this. You did this. You're an adult. All these laws apply. And I'm telling you, as a lawyer, the consequences of these things can be devastating, financially devastating, legally devastating. You have got to understand the power of marriage and choose wisely. Why not take your time? Once you're in the marriage, the only way to get out of it is legally. In most parts of the world, there's a process, a divorce-type process. Sometimes it's called an annulment, depending on how long the relationship lasted and the circumstances. But no matter what, you got to legally end it because legally it started. And when it started, there's a whole bunch of rules, laws, opportunities, and responsibilities. And it's powerful to be married legally, which could be great for you, depending on your situation in life. But you have to understand that marriage license is a piece of paper. Marriage license is worthless if it's void because you weren't meeting the age of consent, you were too close in relation in terms of being relatives, you were married to too many people. Some parts of the world, and this is rapidly, you know, constantly changing, there are rules about people of the same gender. In some parts of the world, including the United States, there were rules about people from different racial groups or ethnic group marrying. These are all changing. The idea being that people can pick whoever they want to pick, whose age of consent, who's, you know, not too close of a relative, things of that nature, and is not married to too many other people at the same time. So marriage is a big deal. Make the right choice. Understand the consequences. Do not get married. Look up a firm that you understand what the legal responsibilities are of getting married. Thank you for joining me, and you can always come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information.